September is Swordtember, an art challenge where artists from across the world get given a random prompt to make one sword-based piece of art every day for 30 days straight. But there's a problem. I'm only 7 days in and I'm already feeling the pressure. However, I'll be sharing with you how I went from this to this and every lesson I learned along the way to become a better artist. But first of all, we need to take it back. I'm an animator, not a 3D artist. So I started this challenge to force myself out of my comfort zone and use these prompts to get better. So I started with day 1, Cosmic. The basic idea was to have a few simple shapes, with the main focus of the model being the blade. I started blocking out these shapes with simple geometry before working on the blade itself. I used a mixture of noise textures and colour ramps to get this galaxy type effect, and masked it out with more noise textures. I also animated the mask just a little bit and added some slight parallax in the background texture. And the final result was this. Not bad for day 1. The idea was simple enough to execute and the subtle animated objects gave it a bit of life, but it was too flat and it didn't have much interest. We need to change that. So on day 2, I took a similar approach as yesterday. I used simple shapes to execute my idea, and since I was only spending about an hour a day on each piece, I couldn't afford for it to be too complex. My main goal here was to come up with something less flat and build upon what I'd learned in day 1. I gave everything a bit more depth by adding paneling, holes, grooves, and a little bit more animation. I used a similar texture setup as the Cosmic Blade for the fire, and for the blades I used a cube as a boolean and animated the blades moving left to right. Perfect. The final result was this. Not bad for my second attempt, but it could be better. The textures could do with a bit more work, because I was using a free asset pack I found online, so nothing really matched up. But I could start to see some progress. I was optimistic, but that didn't last long. After day 2, I wanted to solve the problem that I had with mismatching textures. So my idea was to minimise the amount of textures I was using across the whole piece and keep it super simple. Followed the same steps as before, using basic shapes and some subtle animation. Then this happened. I have no idea where it went so wrong. The textures are awful, everything looks off. I was gutted. It was at this point I felt like giving up. It seemed like I'd taken 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and it felt like there was no way to improve. It's a new day and it's time to shake off the issues that I had yesterday and learn from them. I was too ambitious, so let's go back to the basics. I drew inspiration from the Large Hadron Collider and simplified a portion of its pipes. I added in some details such as some screws and some smaller pipes just to keep it interesting, all the while keeping it simple. For the atoms, I used a translucent shader mixed in with a glossy shader to get this slightly translucent orb, and the blast energy I found from this tutorial on Twitter. And the final result ended up not being too bad. The materials were a lot better than yesterday's, but I feel like there could have been a bit more animation. I was finally back on track, and I shouldn't bite off more than I could chew. With today's prompt being fairy, I knew I had to stay away from wooden textures because they would have just taken way too long. So instead, I decided to take a bit of a different approach. I kept the model super simple and used some set-driven keys to add a bit of squash and stretch to the animation. This ended up being a bit cumbersome, and to be honest, I could have got an easier setup by using some bendy bones. The shape key workflow was also used in the liquid shooting out of the bottle. I quite like the end result here. The liquid could do with a bit of work, but it's also lacking a bit of detail in the rope and some other smaller areas too. Another thing I need to work on. 2 days to go and the pressure is on. By now I feel like I know where I'm going wrong, but with such little time to work on these, I need to make sure I'm not making the same mistakes twice. With this one I wanted to mash together a few different elements from horror films, like Halloween, The Ring, and all the other horror films that use a baseball bat. Again, modelling this was simple. The only thing worth noting here was the VHS ribbon, and that was made using a curve which I extruded to give it some geometry. For the wraps, I created a cylinder and duplicated it a bunch of times, adjusted the scale and rotation to make it look like they were overlapping each other. The wooden texture on the bat was also really easy. I used a wave texture, scaled it way up and adjusted the colours using a colour ramp. And by the end of it, I quite liked the finished render. I don't know if you noticed, but I brightened up this render quite a lot, and I really think it makes a difference compared to the rest. With 1 day to go, I finally feel like I'm in a good place. What could go wrong? It was time to take a look at what I'd learned over the past 6 days and put it to the test. I took inspiration from the millions of Barbie merchandise there is out there, from toys, props, accessories, and even this thing. Well, maybe not this thing. I used the extra objects in Blender to create this star and also this gemstone super quickly. The wire is made using a curve, but instead of extruding it, I added a profile and made it round. I also created a plane and used a shrink wrap modifier to get this Barbie sticker on the handle. I added some animation to the straighteners and boom, the results were in. I think I've made some pretty decent progress over the last 7 days. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. I'll be continuing the rest of Swordtember all the way up to September 30th. So if you want to know how each one turns out, I'll be posting them here on YouTube, so make sure you subscribe to see them. And if you want to know how to master animation in Blender, check out this playlist.